All right, hello. Welcome to the Modern Thought Room. My name is Jethro. This episode is going to be about oversimplified insight, right? And what you need to do to make sure you don't make mistakes following it. Now, I'm not going to actually say that people are just out there producing a bunch of information that is uninsightful. That'd be a lie. There's a lot of very good content that's being produced, and a lot of it is very helpful. It is your job to do these two things. One, accept their context that they are providing the insight within. And two, level set for your context. Those two things, and you're good, right? I listen to and consume a lot of content online as well, and I find a lot of very helpful information. And I very rarely am in a place where I would almost accuse somebody as providing false information. Like I'm also very picky about who I listen to, but in general, what I do is I say, before I run with this, what's their context and what's my context? And I negotiate the difference between the two and place the insight in that kind of difference, right? So that's something I think, simply put, those two steps will save a lot of time and error and take and mitigate a lot of risk, right? Um, because everyone is producing and arriving at insight, but it's so context specific. It's more context specific than you realize, right? It's more context specific. So for me, and like what I prioritize is how we think. That is a step above, not above as in like it's better, but a step above as in it removes a certain level of context specific application that now when you're focused on just the systematic way of thinking or the strategic way of thinking or the dynamic way of thinking, you now can apply that to different situations. Insights you can't always apply um, as easily or as often, right? Why? Because context matters, and you have to not only just the general, not just a general context, but their context and your context have to be negotiated in order for you to rightly place the insight and it be of true value for you. So why it happens, right? Why does it seem like um, there is, or why might there even be this oversimplified insight that's available, right? I'm calling it oversimplified insight because you don't get the context. You don't get the context. That's the only thing that makes it oversimplified, right? So somebody has an insight that they arrive to either from two things mostly, or let's say three things: experience, research, or okay, let me back up so I'm not confused. Experience in terms of years, months, time. Experience in terms of time. Experience in terms of in a moment, and then research or learning. Right. So folks are arriving at insights through these kind of different modes, and when they're presenting to you, what the algorithm and folks that think they've mastered the algorithm or are trying to work with the algorithm, what they'll promote is for a simplified version of it, right? Now, again, I don't, from the beginning I said, hey, it's not a true or false type of thing. That is correct, right? It's correct from the standpoint of them being persuasive and providing value for you that you can easily consume, right? It's not necessarily, right, insightful in the way that's sort of I think transformative, yeah, transformative, or right, enlightening in a way that kind of allows you to, build off from it. So what does this look like, right? You're on one of these social media platforms and somebody gives you a 3-step framework, right? We'll have, Lord willing, I'll produce an episode about framework, because framework is something I think that's good and bad, but that's another time, right? So they provide you with this framework, and the framework is based on maybe one or two key insights that they've uncovered, either through their over the time experience in a situation, their in a moment experience, right? Or their learning or research, right? So they'll present this information and you say, that's insightful. I didn't have it. And that part is true. Now, what is unfortunate is people will learn an insight, misapply it because they've misapplied it, or two, misapply it because they didn't negotiate the context, and then go and say such and such, um, you know, is providing false information, or their strategies don't work, or I tried to implement this and I didn't get those same results, or da 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 da, bunch of reason why they weren't as successful as the person who presented the insight made it seem that they would be, right? Why isn't it working? Why didn't I get those same results when I use the same insight and the principles off of that insight, or the framework more so off of that insight, to go and make these different changes? Why? Well, it's because you didn't give enough care to their context and level set for your context and negotiate the two, so that you can know, okay, what could I reasonably expect from applying their insight wrapped up in this framework that is going to make a positive impact in my situation, which has this context, right? And this happens a lot. So again, backing up a little bit, reason for these kind of oversimplified, condensed insights often shared to you as like frameworks is because there's a general push to kind of communicate things in a neat and succinct way, um, quickly and immediately and broadly. And that is a good thing. And it's a bad thing also. Good in a way that a lot of people are educated, bad in a way that the depth of the education is shallow, unless that person goes and takes it another level, right? So that's something to be mindful of. So the consequences, right, is most immediately a misapplied learning, right, from a framework that somebody's based off of an insight that they've gained, right? And then the time lost from, you know, applying a framework or a directive from somebody that gained a particular insight. And then lastly, frustration, right? So misapplied learning, time lost, and then frustration ultimately. And that frustration part's probably the worst, because you're like, man, I lost time and I feel like I've been misled. And you haven't necessarily been misled. You probably, I don't want to say failed to, you probably stopped short of negotiating the context of their insight in the context of your circumstance. And doing that is very important, because it makes the difference and it allows you to properly apply the truths of whatever framework or insights you're looking to apply. Right. So again, all insight, instruction, guidance needs to be accepted for its context, one, and then level set for your context. We have a lot of access to a lot of very good information, and it's very easy to just pick something up and run with it, but you need to slow down so you can make the most of all this great knowledge that's available, right? Now, again, I'm gonna say this because I said in the beginning, but I really want this to be made clear. It's not always necessary that people are providing, you know, poor guidance or misinformation. There is a good amount of that happening, but there's a good amount of folks overlooking context, context. Just taking your time to acknowledge context will bring you down a little bit, and you'll be a little bit more calm as you're consuming content, getting guidance, and looking for direction. And what that also does is that puts the ball back in your court, right? Um, it puts you back behind the wheel, being the person to determine, what the outcome is to the best of your ability. It takes it away from being a situation where you're waiting for somebody to tell you exactly what to do to give you a playbook, and now you're the one designing the playbook. And that makes a big difference, because whether somebody's giving you a playbook or you're designing the playbook, there will still be failures that need to be overcome. Yet, when it's you that are making the plays, now who else could you blame, right? Who else could you point fingers at? Who else could you assign some of the fault for the whatever shortcoming it is, right? So a key thing, and something that I'll champion for as long as I can, is one of the most direct and immediate ways to change circumstances in our circumstances is to change how we think, right? And the modern day requires a type of thinking that yesterday did not require, and also may not be what tomorrow requires, most likely won't. So it's good to, as soon as possible, begin making shifts. And if you're an individual and you only represent yourself, you have a bit more control over that. But if you're part of a group, you're part of a team, then it gets tricky because you are also dependent on folks around you doing that. And with a true and concerted effort, if a team were to come together and change how they think about things collectively and across the and each within each individual member, that team would be able to do and achieve um very great things, right? Very, very great. I don't even like that I said very great in in a sentence, but forgive me. I'm trying not to look at my notes right now, trying to finish this thought. But very great. Don't repeat that. All right. Um. So talking about the access stuff, blah blah blah. Um. The bite-sized nugget stuff, right? The bite-sized nugget stuff. Now we're all busy. Everybody has a lot going on. Um. Time might seem like, you know there's never enough. Now, the thing about the bite-sized nuggets, and this ties into understanding the first part about accepting the person's context or the context of however you gain this insight, is that you need the work, you need the experience, you need the build-up to get the true value of the insight in a way where you can then manipulate the insight or that learning, right? So this is an old school saying. I'm not that old, but I like saying old school. Um, the old school saying is to show your work, right? Particularly in math class. If you was one of those kids in math class that you did everything but want to show your work, cool. But the purpose of it was actually very important because yes, you can arrive at the right answer, right? You could arrive at the right answer, but on the day that you had a test, and the test, in the adult world looks very different and the consequences are much greater. When you have to show up for a test and you don't have a calculator on you, you don't have a cheat sheet on you, you don't have the 5 times tables that you've memorized, you got to deal with all of them. When you have to deal with a situation and that for you represents a test, muscle memory becomes more of a thing than just, you know, the one-off things that you kind of like either memorize or just remember hearing or know, or some, loose way of having those things to kind of like recall, right? So a teacher, an instructor would ask you to show your work because it's important for you to know the steps to arrive at something, because when they go to help you or to show you where your error was made, they'll be able to tell you exactly where the error was made. That's why coaches, therapists, consultants, good advisors, good mentors, all those functions, what do they often do? They work with folks to identify specifically where in the steps in the sequence there is a place that they could have made a different type of intervention that would have led to and ultimately a different result. So that whole principle of showing your work, and this is a whole another separate thing, discussion that could be had, is when they talk about like some of the fundamental things you learn early on and why those things are so important and why it's like a very big thing when kids have poor education in those first few years, is because when you know certain types of skills like arithmetic in a profound, like deep, intuitive way, you're then able to do higher order things. And mastery is being really able to manipulate a thing. If you don't feel like you're really confident and able to manipulate something or a subject matter or an issue, there's a type of mastery that's missing or in development or in works. And that's fine. You're not going to be the master of everything overnight. And that's part of why when you get those like bite-size insights, I say, or bite-size frameworks, those are good. Do your best to apply them, but be present, study them, learn what kind of actually makes them work. Why do they really apply? Why do they apply better in this context versus that context? Right? Don't just try to implement them, not have them work, and then throw a fit. Right? Be like, nah, for real, this probably would have worked if I already had $25,000 in the bank. This probably would have already worked if I was a hometown hero and everybody would rally behind the launch of my restaurant. There are a lot of things that context can make right. So again, understand when you're getting that insight, when you're getting those learnings from people that are very successful and they're showing you blueprints, the blueprints have worked for them, will work for other people. But if they don't work for you, it's probably more of you and how you understood how they were presenting it in the context they're presenting it. And then also if you did any type of level setting for your context and your situation. So those are things that I think happen on repeat. And it's unfortunate because sometimes we all can kind of forget because we've got a lot of stuff going on, we're busy. And so we can forget to like say, hey, whoa, um, I know that worked for them, but my situation is a little bit different. So let me make sure I get the core, whatever insights, learnings, that they're using to build this framework or to build this blueprint, and let me stack those pieces up against the pieces that I have and know very well. Because behind any framework, behind any blueprint or schema is and are insights that govern it. And if those insights fall out of your context or the context that is needed of you, they may not work correctly. And so the issue isn't really in your ability to apply them. What the issue is then where and how you assessed the purpose of that blueprint, framework, series of insights. All right. So those things aren't, um, you know, everyone is not online producing false content, but the burden is really, in actuality, it's really on you to just remember the context, right? If you have a certain types of values, somebody else does not have those values, they give you advice in a loose way, and you take them and run with them, you then have to come back to yourself and say, oh man, I see why that might have not worked. The core moral of what they were pitching is not something that I wholeheartedly believe, and therefore I wasn't able to reproduce that blueprint with the same type of conviction that they were able to, and so far my results haven't proved to be the same. So now I might need to go back to the drawing board and produce something else. And I have complete faith that you will. I think, again, I think people, by the time you get to a certain point, most people are very talented. Most people are very talented. And when you listen to people's stories and you find out their unique takes, you're like, man, folks are talented, folks have ability. At the same time, though, folks sometimes don't realize where they're taking the play off. And oftentimes it's in taking the time to slow down and think systematically about certain things. Right? Again, you need to do the thinking that the day requires. And today is a very dynamic day. AI is making it even more competitive. And so if you're playing around, don't know what to tell you. Peace. Adios. Ciao.